looking at this map here, can I move you back a little bit, sisters?
Oh, yes,
okay.
okay.
Thanks very much. So, right, now the theme of our tour, as Janet told you downstairs, is examples of loyal obedience. And this is very much a tour of two halves, really. In the first part of our tour, we're going to talk about the subject of obedience. And in the second half of our tour, we're going to talk about disobedience. Obviously, with obedience, we're going to discuss the benefits. With disobedience, we're going to discuss the consequences and problems that come as a result of that. Now, the kind of theme text from the Bible for our tour is found in the book of Hebrews. So maybe you'd like to look that up. Hopefully you've got your Bible with you, or you can look over someone's shoulder or share with somebody. So Hebrews chapter 11, and we want to look together at verse 8. So Hebrews 11 and verse 8. Where it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed in going out into a place he was destined to receive as an inheritance, and he went out, although not knowing where he was going. So we're familiar perhaps with this chapter. We call it the chapter of faith, because pretty much every paragraph in this chapter begins with the words by faith, and it records the acts of servants of God in pre-Christian times. But basically here we're told that Abraham moves house. Now most of us here have probably moved house. It doesn't usually require faith to move house, does it? Loads of people that are atheists move house. So why on the earth does the Bible say that it took faith for Abraham to move house? Well, that's really, we're going to answer that question with the first part of our tour. Why it says that about Abraham. Now, can anybody tell me, where was it that Abraham was living when God told him he wanted him to move? Sister? Yes, the city of Ur. Now, if we have a look on the map here, here's the city of Ur. Now, today, the city of Ur is a few miles south of the Euphrates River. Now, in the last 4,000 years, the Euphrates River has changed its course. When Abraham was alive, the city of Ur was on the Euphrates River. Okay, that's why it was built there. So Abraham and Sarah, they left the city of Ur, and they travelled all the way through Shinar, which is the name for this area here, and they travelled all the way up to Carchemish, and at Carchemish they crossed the Euphrates, and if we then jump to this map, here's Carchemish, and they made their way south into what ultimately would be the promised land. Because, of course, Israel was the land promised to Abraham, the guy that we're talking about here. So basically what our objective is with the first segment of this tour is to try to use the exhibits here in the British Museum to build up a picture in your mind's eye of what it was like to live in the city of Ur 4,000 years ago. And we hope that once you've got that clear picture in your mind's eye, you'll understand why the Bible says it took faith for Abraham and Sarah to leave. Are we clear? So that's our objective. Okay, first thing we're going to look at then, in the city of Ur, is just down here. Okay, so again, if we can have a nice semicircle around here, but the idea is that by the end of the tour, you're all trained and you all get yourself into position automatically without me having to say anything. Now, in London, I know we have visitors here from Boston and probably elsewhere in the world as well. When you visit London, what buildings in the city of London would you recognise just from their silhouette? Anyone give me one?
Tower, Big Ben.
Yes, Big Ben, okay. Any others?
Tower Bridge.
Tower Bridge, yeah. Alison?
London Eye.
The London Eye, yeah. So, question is, which building in the ancient city of Ur would you have recognised just from the silhouette? Well, it is indeed this building here, the ziggurat. Does it remind you of anything else?
Pyramid.
Okay, pyramids, yeah. Anything else? The Tower of Babel, yeah.
Confusion.
Confusion, that's what it means in Hebrew. But in Sumerian, Babel or Bab-ilu means the gate of the gods or the gate of God. Because what the Sumerians believed was that the gods that they worshipped would come down onto the top of the ziggurat, walk down the stairs, and then the spirit of those gods would walk among them in the city. Now where do you think they might have got that idea from?
The angels that came down.
Yeah, the angels that sinned in Noah's day. We need to remember the period of history we're talking about here is 4,000 years ago. This is only a couple of generations after the flood. So the Great Deluge was very clear in the minds of people living at that particular time. It was recent history for Abraham and the people of his time. So yes, evidently they got that idea from the behaviour of the demons that came down to the earth prior to the flood. What did the ziggurat look like? Well, we don't have to guess because we actually have some of the bricks from that ziggurat. Now, these bricks look remarkably modern to me. I don't know how they look to you. Glazed and dyed as well. So if you can imagine this humongous structure made of coloured bricks that would have looked when it was brand new. Very outstanding. In fact, it is very similar to a lot of the design work in Babylon. These cities had a lot of similarities. And if you go to the Pergamon Museum, we just talked about Pergamon in our book study, haven't we? If you go to the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, you can actually see a reconstruction of the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, which again is very similar to this glazed blue bricks. Okay, so we've got an idea of the most dominant building in the city of Ur then, where Abraham and Sarah were living. What about land? Was land expensive in that city, just as we expect land to be expensive in a modern day city? Well, the answer is yes. Let's prove it. Okay, what we're having a look at here, these are boundary stones. Now, the Bible does mention boundary stones. When God gave the Mosaic law to his people, the Israelites, who of course were the descendants of Abraham, he actually said to them, once you settle into the promised land I'm going to give you, and I tell you, you're going to live there, and you're going to live there, and you're going to live there, and you lay out all of your boundary stones, he put a law saying you must not move the boundary stone of your neighbour or fellow man. That's kind of obvious, but why would it be a crime to move someone's boundary stone? Stealing their land? Yeah. What else might you be stealing? We need to bear in mind that it was an agricultural society. Exactly, they were stealing their livelihood, their food, so that's why God gave that law. Now, the boundary stones used by the Israelites were just very simple affairs, they were just stones. But notice the boundary stones used by pagan people were very different. They were covered in text and messages and spells, curses and incantations, appealing to the various gods and goddesses that were worshipped in these different cities. And basically what these stones say is if you move my boundary marker, then the god Sin or the goddess Ishtar or this god or that god will curse you, so you better leave it alone. Now the presence of these boundary stones all over places like ancient Babylon and ancient Ur confirmed for us that land was at premium, just like it is in cities today. Okay, so we've got an idea then, Abraham and Sarah, we know where Ur is geographically speaking, we know the most dominant building in the city, we know that land was expensive. What about the religion, the false religion going on in the city of Ur? Well, let's find out about that. Tell me, circle around here, please. I want you to go to see item number 10 in this cabinet here. I am, thank you very much, that's very kind of you. So item number 10 then in this cabinet, who'd like to tell me what's depicted on item number 10? Just by my finger here. It is mother and child. And you know, archaeologists say that this is probably the oldest example of mother and child worship anywhere in the world. This example here at the British Museum. Now, mother and child worship is still very common today, isn't it? In what particular faith? Catholicism. Yes, the idea of Madonna and child, or Mary and child. A lot of the images of Madonna and child look exactly the same as this depiction here, confirming for us, which is illustrated in many of the tours we do here at the museum, that so many of these religious customs that are around today have got nothing to do with Christianity. They come from all these various pagan nations that lived in ancient times. Okay, so we see then that Abraham and Sarah lived in a city not where there was true religion practiced, but where there was false religion practiced. So question, how did Abraham and Sarah learn the truth? They didn't have two Jehovah's Witnesses knock on their door, did they? Say, hello there, we'll be interested in the Watchtower in a week. How on the earth did Abraham and Sarah learn the truth? No, because who was Abraham's dad? Anyone know? It was Terah, and the Bible says that Terah, he worshipped one of these false gods. He was not a worshipper of Jehovah, so he didn't learn it from their parents. Okay, could be.
What about Lot? Didn't you hear something from Lot?
No, that is afterwards. Yeah, a little later.
What are oral traditions?
Getting warmer. Okay. Interestingly, in my congregation in Horndean, myself and a young brother, about 2 or 3 years ago, we did a project in Microsoft Excel. We did a timeline for the Bible. It's quite interesting doing a timeline because you learn a whole bunch of things. And one of the things we learned doing this timeline, and this might shock you, is that Shem, one of the sons of Noah,
Still alive.
he actually, get this, outlived Sarah. Sarah died before Shem did. So evidently, Abraham learnt the truth directly from Shem. But those people lived so long in those days, there actually are not that many links from Adam all the way through to Abraham. You're only having information passed on maybe 3 or 4 times with that, because people's lifespans were so long. Okay, so that's evidently how Abraham learned the truth then from his great-great-great-grandfather Shem. Okay. Right, so we've talked about religion, we've talked about land prices, we've talked about the most dominant building. What about maths and science? Was there any evidence of that in Earth 4,000 years ago? Yes, there was. Let's have a look. Removed for another exhibition, but basically these tablets along here in this upper section illustrate the fact that both in Babylon and in the city of they were very advanced mathematically. The evidence that archaeologists found suggests that the people there, the children, were trained mathematically to be able to do not just the normal mathematical functions of addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, but they also were able to work out things like square roots and cube roots, and what's more, they were able to apply their mathematics as well. We're all familiar with the concept of an arch, are we? Clever an arch, isn't it? How's an arch supported? By the keystone in the centre. Guess where the arch was invented? Yeah, in the city of Ur. It's the earliest example of an arch anywhere in the world was found just there. What about medicine then? Were they advanced medicinally? Well, in this cabinet again, bottom shelf, closest to the wall here, the museum tells us that this is actually the record of a dermatologist in the city of Ur. Now, you might be familiar, dermatology is, of course, the study of skin complaints. And so evidently, in Ur, in Abraham's time, they had a similar system to the system that we're familiar with today. Namely, that if you're unwell, you first of all go along to like a general practitioner, and he would refer you then to a specialist. And here we have the records of a dermatologist. And interestingly, on this script, when it's translated, we see all of the ointments and treatments that this particular man tried on the people that he was treating. Again, 4,000 years ago this is. Okay, so that's mathematics then, and medicine. What about art and craft? Let's have a look just here. Okay, now what we're looking at in this particular cabinet here, 2 items. We'll talk about this one in a second. This particular item is known as the Standard of Ur, and evidently, although we can't be dogmatic about this, evidently the Standard of Ur was designed to be placed on the top of a pole. A little bit, you're familiar with the Roman legions that would carry their ensigns on a pole? Evidently it was the same kind of idea. And the interesting thing for archaeologists and historians is that if you look at this side of the Standard, it gives us a depiction of the army in Ur and the king of Ur. If you look on the other side, it gives you a depiction of general life in Ur, agriculture, farming, and the like. So we've been able to learn quite a bit about the lifestyle of the inhabitants of Ur by looking at their standard there. Then, with regard to art and craft, we have this famous piece here. If you've been reading the Watchtower and Awake magazine for many years, you probably recognise this because it has been photographed in our magazine a number of times over the years. It's known as the ram in the thicket. It's actually a goat in a hedge. That doesn't sound as good, does it? It's a ram in the thicket. The reason it's called the ram in the thicket is because... Anyone work it out? Connection with Abraham? Yeah, Abraham offering up Isaac, and of course God saved Isaac by getting a ram caught in a thicket. Actually though, that's the only tenuous link. This has got nothing to do with what happened with Abraham and Isaac. The only commonality reality is that both this piece and Abraham are both from the same city, the city of Ur. That's it. But if we take it as a piece of craftsmanship, I mean, I wonder how many of us standing here today could make something like that. I know I couldn't. And bear in mind again, this is 4,000 years old. I wonder what it would have looked like when it was brand new.
What is it made of? Do you know?
A whole host of different things. Shell, bone, gold, lapis lazuli, and a number of other things. Okay, so we get an idea of craftsmanship then. We've got medicine, we talked about maths and science and buildings and land prices. What about fashion? What did you girls wear in 4,000 years ago? Headdress. Now, how many of you girls would fancy wearing that when you go shopping on a Saturday? So, one or two maybe? Okay, now the interesting thing about this headdress is it's actually the headdress of a slave. Admittedly the slave of the queen, but a slave nonetheless. If you think this headdress is impressive, don't walk over there, but turn around and there's a photograph in the opposite cabinet of a reconstruction of the queen's headdress, which you can see was far more neat and ornate than this particular slave headdress. And again, a number of other products. Now I must just point out to you, generally speaking, in the British Museum and on the tours that we do here, all of the pieces that we show you are originals. Generally speaking, the museum does not go in for fakes, replicas, duplicates or copies. But this is a reconstruction. The reason, however, that we know it's accurate is because the original is underneath it. So as you can see, the lady wearing this headdress got a whole lot of filler. She was in fact crushed, but thankfully for her, she was crushed post-mortem rather than ante-mortem, so that's probably good. But interestingly, the archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley, who excavated the city of Ur, was a very good archaeologist, he kept very good records. And when they excavated this particular room where they found the queen and all these slaves wearing these ornate headdresses, they drew this diagram. You can see the heading here, the Great Death Pit. Have a look at the diagram at the bottom. And if you've got good vision, you might be able to see that what the archaeologists have drawn, what they found, was basically neat rows of skeletons. And next to each skeleton, there's a tiny little black dot. And the black dot symbolises where the archaeologists found cups, very similar to the cups in that cabinet over there. So, maybe you'll see a example. You come across this whole range of bodies, and next to each body is a cup, and all the bodies are in the kind of fetal position. What conclusion would you draw? Yeah, that they killed themselves. They took poison. So why on the earth would a whole bunch of healthy, relatively young people all lay down and voluntarily drink poison?
To join with the queen.
That's right. Yeah, that's the conclusion, and based on other evidence. Basically, the people in the city of Ur, one of their false religious beliefs was, again, a false religious belief that's very prominent today, a belief in the immortality of the soul, that when you die, you don't really die. And in order for the queen to continue to be served by her maids after her death, the only way for them to do that was for them to end their own lives in order to carry on serving her in the afterlife. That's what they did. Now, do you remember the theme of our tour? Examples of loyal obedience. Doesn't this illustrate that not all obedience is good for you? Because these people were being obedient to the custom and belief of their particular city, but it certainly did not benefit them, did it? And in fact, when they get resurrected after Armageddon, and we welcome them back from the dead in the new system, we're going to have to say to them, I'm really sorry, but actually you've been asleep for the last 4,000 years. So it illustrates not all obedience is beneficial. It's only beneficial when we obey the truth, when we obey what is right. Okay, so we've talked about religious customs, we've talked about arts, crafts, science, buildings, etc., etc. Two more things before we switch to the second half of our tour. What on the earth would you do for entertainment in the city of Ur 4,000 years ago? Well, let's find out. Okay. So in this cabinet here then, we have one of the world's earliest board games. Again, excavated in the city that Abraham and Sarah originally lived in, and it that's known, by the way, as 20 squares. Why? Because there are 20 squares. And as you can see, it's a race game, very similar to certain board games today. So we've got the playing pieces here on either side, black playing pieces and white playing pieces. And then here, we've got the equivalent of like ancient dice or throwing sticks, which would determine the moves that would be made by each particular player. So do we know whether or not Abraham and Sarah whiled away the odd evening playing 20 squares? Well, of course we don't, but they might have done. When they get resurrected, maybe we'll challenge them to a game. So if you're really one of those people that love board games, they do sell a replica of this, I'm told, in the shop downstairs. But there we are. Okay, so 20 squares, by the way, it is still a popular game today, actually. Variations of it are still played in India down to this very day. The Assyrians played 20 squares, Babylonians, the whole of that part of the world at that time. The last thing then that we want to talk about, which we haven't discussed yet, is what exactly were the houses like in Ur? Well, let's find out. Unfortunately, if you like to gather around here, unfortunately what we do not have in this museum, it would be nice if we did, but we don't, is a reconstruction of a standard home in the city of Ur. What we do have is the fact that in other museums, models have been made, what Ur looked like, and we have a photograph of a model, which I know is not very exciting, is it really? But you're going to have to use your imagination for this. But what the archaeologists found when they excavated Ur was that on an average, the houses had between 13 and 14 rooms. Now, I don't know how many rooms your house has got, but mine's got 3, I think. So, plus a hallway. So, yeah, so massive houses. They also found that underneath each house was a cellar stocked with food. They found that the houses were very nicely furnished. As someone mentioned a moment ago, they had a form of heating. They had a rudimentary form of air conditioning, although not powered by electricity, I must say, but a rudimentary design of air conditioning. And then, amazingly, the archaeologists found underneath each house baked clay sewage pipes to take away waste. And they also found baked clay pipes that delivered a fresh supply of water to each home. Amazing, isn't it? This is 4,000 years ago. So one of the objectives of these tours that we do in the museum have many objectives, but one of them is to try and dispel the myth that people years ago were very backward. That's just not true. The people in the city of Ur had a lifestyle not that dissimilar from the lifestyle we have today. The big difference was they didn't have electricity. But other than that, their lifestyle was very advanced. Now do we understand why the Bible says in Hebrews 11 and verse 8, by faith Abraham left the city of Ur. For us today, I'm sure all of us have been camping at some point in our life, and camping's good fun, isn't it? For like 2 days. But what if I was to say to you, for the rest of your life, you've now got to live in a tent, no electricity, none of your creature comforts, just in the middle of a field somewhere. That's what Abraham and Sarah gave up. Life in a very comfortable, advanced, cosmopolitan city to wander the rest of their life in tents. All based on the fact that God said, if you're obedient, Abraham, I've got something I'm going to give you. But actually, it never wound up getting given to Abraham. It got given to his descendants. Certainly took faith. Now, when Abraham left the city of Ur, the Bible doesn't give us the details on what he did, but logically, he would have sold his home. And today, a very popular group of people are estate agents, aren't they? I hope there's no estate agents here. Did they have estate agents in the city of Ur? Yeah, they did. Let's have a look. See, we want to have a look at these 2 exhibits here, this one here and this one here. And this little fragment here tells us that this inscription runs alongside the back of the statue and records many sales of what are probably plots of land in return for quantities of wool and copper. And this white stone slab here says it's inscribed with the deeds of sale. So again, a bit like today, we have both estate agents and then we have obviously a system for land registry recording the sale and purchase of land and property. Evidently they had exactly the same system operating 4,000 years ago in the city of Ur. So I wonder what Abraham swapped his house for. Well, we don't know. Probably a whole draft of the snazziest camels he could get hold of and the nicest tents he could possibly acquire. visitors have just turned up. That's good. Okay, so it's a good point for them to turn up because we're just about to switch to the other half of our tour. So in the first half of our tour then, we've looked at the subject of obedience, and we've seen that with Abraham and Sarah, they demonstrated great obedience in their willingness to leave behind the comfortable lifestyle of Ur and spend the rest of their life living in a tent. We said the second half of our tour, we want to flip the coin and we want to talk about disobedience. And what we're going to consider in this half of our tour is basically a statement made in the Bible that has caused a bit of trouble for a lot of people. It's in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 7. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 7. And starting verse 1. It says there, when Jehovah your God at last brings you into the land to which you are going so as to take possession of it, he must also clear away from before you, he must also clear away populous nations from before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations more populous and mighty than you are. So let's just make sure we've got ourselves clear where we are in the stream of time here. This passage is like 400 years, 350 years after the time of Abraham who we've been talking about. God is here talking to Abraham's descendants, who by now have become a nation, the nation of Israel. And he says to Abraham's descendants, I'm going to give you this land where these 7 nations are dwelling. And what does God tell the Israelites to do? Well, if you look at verse 5, God says to the Israelites, this is what you should do to them. Their altars you should pull down, their sacred pillars you should break down, their sacred poles you should cut down, and their graven images you should burn with fire. So God basically says to the Israelites, when you move into this land, you are to destroy the religion of these people. Wipe it out. Then, going back to verse 3 and 4, God says to them basically, you mustn't marry these people. You must form no marriage alliance. Your son mustn't marry her daughter, or vice versa. But the bit that has caused disturbance for a lot of Bible readers is verse 2, where it says, Jehovah your God will certainly abandon them to you, and you must defeat them. You should without fail devote them to destruction. You must conclude no covenant with them, nor show them any favour. So God basically says, when you move into this land, you are to get rid of all these people. And for a lot of people reading the Bible, they think, well, goodness me, what kind of a God is God if he gives his people, the Israelites, a law like that? Tells them to move into a land and just kill everybody. That's not very Christian. So we need to basically answer that question. Why would God give a command that seems so harsh? Well, to answer that question, we're going to have a look at these people, the Canaanites, and find out what they were like. To do that, we're going to move next door. Okay, so if you'd like to all filter your way in here, feel free to walk around there, but please don't touch the exhibit there. Okay, we're only going to be pausing here momentarily. Now, this particular wall chart is heading up with the word the Phoenicians, and you might be thinking to yourself, hold on a minute, that wasn't one of the 7 nations we just read about. Correct? It's not. It tells us here, by the beginning of the 1st millennium BC, the Israelites occupied most of Canaan, except for the southern coastal strip, which continued to be held by the Philistines. We jump down a couple of sentences. The remaining Canaanite territory on the north coast of what is now Lebanon and Syria became known as Phoenicia. The name derives from the Greek word for purple, a reference to one of the principal industries of the region, the extraction of dye from murex shells and the production of purple-coloured fabric. So let's just make sure we've got that nice and crystal clear. These 7 nations that we've just read about in Deuteronomy were known in Joshua's day, in the Israelites' day when they first moved in, they were known generically by the name Canaanite, all the 7 nations. And what we're told here by the museum is that in later times, the Canaanites became known as the Phoenicians or the Phoenicians. Basically, the Greeks said, oh, they're the purple people, because that's what they did for a living. They made purple. Okay? So whenever you read Phoenicians, think Canaanites, and whenever you think Canaanites or Phoenicians, think these 7 nations that we read about here. We got that clear? Okay. Let's briefly talk about this industry of theirs then, the making of purple. Let's have a look down here. These 3 little shells here at the end. And these are murex shells. And inside a murex shell lives a murex snail. And I don't know how, but one day somebody discovered that if you take a murex snail out of its little home and you squeeze it, you get 1 drop of creamy coloured liquid. And when you expose that liquid to sunlight, it goes a gorgeous deep purple colour. The problem is that to make £1 worth of dye, you don't just need 5 or 10 murex snails. The museum tell us here you need 60,000 murex snails. So can you imagine that? You've got to harvest the snails, you've then got to take each snail from its little home, squeeze it, put it into a big pot, expose it to sunlight, simmer it for 2 weeks, then you've got £1 in weight of purple dye. Do we understand now why in ancient times purple was a colour associated with
Royalty.
Because unless you were very rich, there's no way you would ever be able to afford to have a garment that was dyed with this particular colour. And that was the industry of these people that we're talking about, the Canaanites or the Phoenicians, the Phoenicians. They made purple. Now let's get back to our question. We just read in Deuteronomy, God said to the Israelites, when you move into the promised land, these nations, the Canaanites, I want you to get rid of them. Now the first question we need to deal with is this question. Was God's command, was it ethnic cleansing? No. So why not? Why do we say it wasn't? Can we think of any individuals or groups that the Gibeonites, yes, the Gibeonites were a tribe of Canaanites who changed their behaviour. As a result, they were not only spared by God, but they became a part of the nation of Israel, isn't it? And perhaps we're familiar with the famous miracle that God did when he made the sun stand still all day. Sometimes we miss the point. You know, God did that miracle not to save his own people. He did that miracle to save Gibeonites. One of God's most outstanding miracles was to save a group of these Canaanites who had changed their ways. So it's got, as Sister said, nothing to do with ethnicity. Another example of a Canaanite that was spared because she changed. There's a clue.
Rahab.
Yeah, Rahab, of course. What an unexpected discovery for those 2 spies. Sent into Jericho to do a spying mission, and they ended up making the same. Just shows us today, interested people can crop up in the strangest of places, just like Rahab did. Okay, so it wasn't ethnic cleansing, but we still need to ask the question though, why would God give such a severe command that for those that didn't change, they were to be got rid of? We're going to look at 3 reasons. And the first reason is associated with what we can see in this character's down. So if we actually all shuffle along a little bit. Here we've got some examples, 3 examples of a Canaanite goddess known as Astarte, also known as Ishtar or Ashtoreth, later Venus, Diana. They're all pretty much the same goddess. She was a sex goddess worshipped by the Canaanites. Now, sadly, when the Israelites actually moved into Canaan, as we're going to talk about a little later, although they did get rid of some of the Canaanites, they never actually completed the job God gave them in Deuteronomy chapter 7. Some of the Canaanites survived. We'll talk about that again in a minute. And because of that, over the period of Israelite history, the Israelites got polluted with Canaanite worship. Now maybe a classic example of that pollution was the rule of the Israelite king Ahab. Because Ahab, we might remember, wound up marrying who?
Jezebel.
Yeah, Jezebel. Now who was Jezebel?
The daughter of Ethbaal.
The daughter of Ethbaal, you're quite right. And who was Ethbaal?
He's the Baal.
He was the king of the Sidonians. So he was actually a king there within Canaanite territory. So now Jezebel then, she was a Canaanite, she was an idol worshipper, and she was also immoral, as we'll see in a moment. So basically Ahab broke all of those commands that God gave in marrying Jezebel. Now, how did Jezebel meet her end? Can anybody remember? Yes. Who was on his way? Who was arriving? Jehu. Yes. Jehu, they're appointed by God basically to execute judgment on the king Ahab because he was such a rotten individual and such a breaker of God's law. So Jehu comes along, and what did Jezebel do when she spotted that it was Jehu on his way? Yeah, she painted herself up beautifully and then went and did what?
Sat in the window?
Went upstairs and sat in a window. Now, why on the earth would Queen Jezebel, faced with the threat of death, put all her makeup on to go and sit at a window? Well, we get a clue here in the museum. Have a look at item number 9, this central display here. Can you see item number 9 is a woman looking out of a window. And the museum tell us, next to the legend at the side, woman at a window, says a woman looking out of a balustraded window was a popular Phoenician theme, possibly connected with the goddess Astarte and ritual prostitution. So let's put the pieces of the puzzle together. Jezebel was a queen, daughter of a king of the Sidonians, the Canaanites. Now the Canaanites are worshipping this goddess here, Astarte, in the temple of Astarte. Imagine a big building such as this room here, and the temples would have an upstairs area that was just rows after rows of bedrooms. And the prostitutes who worshipped the goddess Astarte, they would each have a bedroom each, and in each bedroom would be a window, and basically they would sit looking out of the window, inviting men who came along to worship the goddess to come up and have intercourse with them. Now we need to bear in mind, excuse the pun here, that for the Canaanites, prostitution wasn't something they looked down on, it was something they looked up to, in a very literal way. So evidently with Jezebel, the reason why she did herself up beautifully and went up and looked outside of the window was because she knew her time was up, and she wanted to be remembered for the thing that she was most proud of, which was worshipping her goddess, Astarte. So the first thing we see from this example is that immorality, sexual immorality, was pandemic within Canaan. It was like a national version of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we know what God did to Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's one reason why God gave that law in Deuteronomy 7. We said we were going to talk about 3 reasons. The second is just over here. Okay, what we're looking at in this particular cabinet then are a number of pieces of pottery that were found in a city called Lachish. Now Lachish is not too far from Jerusalem, and it was a Judean city. And yet what the archaeologists found there was evidence that the Jews or the Israelites, rather than worshipping just Jehovah God, as outlined in the Ten Commandments and the rest of the law, well, let me read it to you, I think it becomes plain. It says, often representing the goddess Astarte, figurines of this type clearly show that many Judeans continued to respect traditional Canaanite deities. Or to put it in plain English, the Jews became idolaters, worshippers of the idols of these gods and goddesses. Now, how does Jehovah God feel about idolatry? He does. It's interesting, there are several laws of God that run all the way through the Bible. Some of God's laws only were applicable for a part of time. The Sabbath law was one example of that. But some of God's laws, like his law on blood. His law on blood is there at the beginning of the Bible and it's there right at the end of the Bible. And likewise with God's law on idolatry. It's there right at the beginning of the Bible and it's there right at the end of the Bible. Something that Jehovah feels very strongly about. And the Canaanites were idolaters on a massive scale. In fact, we used to have in this room, until they reorganised it a few years ago, bang, smack in the middle, we had a massive black obelisk. And And again, most people don't realise when they see obelisks like that actually those obelisks were phallic symbols. So again, showing the connection between their sex worship and their idolatry. So the second reason then why God gave that very strict command in Deuteronomy was because the Canaanites were idolaters on a grand scale. But what about the third reason? Now for many worldly people that are not servants of Jehovah or not necessarily students of the Bible, it's the third reason that is the clincher or convincer for most people. And it has to do with the Canaanite practice of child sacrifice. Now we used to have in this room, in that corner, and they still have them in the museum, but they're in the basement at the moment, the actual urns, but they're not that dissimilar from these urns here. The actual urns where archaeologists in quite a few places, and we're going to talk about one of them in a moment, found the charred, burnt remains of Canaanite children. Now, can anyone tell me anything, because we have studied this, haven't we, a few times over the years, can anyone tell me anything that you know about the Canaanite practice of child sacrifice?
Accompanied by music?
Accompanied by music, it was. Why was it accompanied by music?
The drum beat would disorient them.
To drown out the screams of the baby that was being burnt alive, yes. Basically, what the Canaanites did is they produced an enormous statue of their god Baal or Molech, perhaps as tall as this room, but the statue, sometimes it was only from kind of waist up. And inside the belly of the statue, they had a furnace going. And the statue had outstretched arms like that, and at the elbow was a cranking mechanism to bring the arm up and down like that. And what the parents had to do to please the god Baal was they had to come along with their newborn, their baby, and they would place the baby, bear in mind the whole thing's made of metal of course, they had to place the baby on the outstretched hands of this idol, this image, and already that's red hot, there's a furnace here. The baby starts screaming, that's why there's the music. Then the priests would crank up the arms and the baby would roll while still alive into the furnace in the belly of that particular image. And this, you'll see in a moment, wasn't just like once or twice they did this. This was national religion. This was how they appeased Baal, because Baal, without going into too much detail, was basically a weather god. And they believed that if they were going to get the rain they needed and the sunshine they needed to keep Baal happy, and the way they kept Baal happy was by sacrificing children. The Canaanites believed that if the parents, and particularly the mother, showed any remorse about the death of their child, then Baal would demand that the next child they had would be sacrificed as well. Now thankfully, although we live in a society today where most people are not at all bothered by idolatry, and we live in a society today where most people are not bothered by immorality either, thankfully we live in a society where still the idea of burning children alive is still, at the moment, thankfully, horror to most people. And that was practiced all over Canaan. That was why God said, you are to get rid of these people. Now we already said 10 minutes ago that although the Israelites, when they moved into Canaan, they started that job of getting rid of the Canaanites, they never finished the job. I'd like to use a little analogy here. Probably most of us know somebody that has contracted cancer. Now if you get cancer and you have an operation to remove the cancer, why is it important that the surgeon gets all of the cancer out? Yeah, and actually, not only does it come back, but what tends to happen? It grows back stronger than before if it's not all removed. And we're now going to take that little analogy and we're going to apply it to the cancer of the Canaanites. And to do that, we're going to conclude by having a look at this wall chart over here. Now, do you want to walk that around there, move in a little bit? I'm going to read this to you. Now, we just need to get the timeline clear here. Can anyone tell me, we've already said that Abraham and Sarah lived 4,000 years ago. Can anyone tell me when it was that the Israelites moved out of Egypt with the 10 plagues? What year that was?
1513?
Yeah, 1513 BCE or BC, which means it was 3,500 years ago, 400-500 years after Abraham's time. And did they move straight into the Promised Land?
They wandered.
No, because the Israelites were disobedient, they ended up wandering around in the wilderness for
40 years.
40 years. And then God brought them into the Promised Land. Their leader by that time was no longer Moses, it was Joshua. And they started off very well, didn't they? They went to Jericho, they went to Ai, they went to various other cities, and they were obedient to God's command. They got rid of the Canaanites that weren't prepared to change.
Well,
Now, if they carried on and finished the job, within, let's say, a generation, the Canaanites would have been history. And when the Canaanites died out, what would have died out with them?
the religion.
Their immorality, their idolatry, and their practice of child sacrifice. If the Israelites had finished the job. But they never did. They allowed pockets of Canaanites to continue living in the Promised Land. Now, using our cancer analogy, if you leave it, it's going to grow back. And that's exactly what happened. And what we're going to look at to conclude is a wall chart here headed up with the word Pharos. Now, if you've got very good eyesight, you'll be able to see that Pharos is a city on the island of Sardinia. And if you're pretty good with your European geography, you'll know that Sardinia is nowhere near Israel. It's hundreds of miles away. We're told by the museum here that Phoenician, who are the Phoenicians?
Canaanites.
Phoenician or Canaanite contacts with Sardinia can be traced back as far as 1000 BC. When did we just say the Israelites moved into the Promised Land? Yeah, so this is 400 or 500 years late after that. But it says it wasn't until the 8th century BC that permanent colonies were established there. We jump down a couple of sentences. It says, excavations at Pharos have revealed temples, fortifications, a religious precinct or Tophet associated with the sacrifice of children, and an extensive cemetery.
Wow.
Let's see if we can just put the pieces of the puzzle together. The Israelites, if they'd been obedient, the Canaanites would have been consigned to the history books by about 1400 BC. Because they didn't finish the job, the Canaanites grew back in number, and at some point between 1400 BC and 1000 BC, the Canaanites changed from being a land-based people to being a sea-based people. Somebody in the Canaanite hierarchy said, this purple that we're selling, why on the earth do we only sell it here? Why don't we get on board a boat, travel around a little bit, and we can flog it to people all over the Mediterranean? That seems like a great idea. And that's what they did. The problem is that as they travelled around the Mediterranean, it wasn't just their purple products they took with them. As they established colonies, they took with them their idolatry, they took with them their immorality, and they took with them their practice of child sacrifice. Which is why archaeologists have found all across the coast of North Africa, in Tunisia, in Egypt, Tophets, cemeteries, just like the one found in Pharos, with thousands of urns containing the charred remains of sacrificed children. Now the question I'd like to put to you is this. Because the Israelites thought they knew better than Jehovah God and decided that they'd have mercy on some of the Canaanites and let them carry on living, I wonder, in the next 1,000 years, because that's how long the Canaanites survived for, another 1,000 years, I wonder how many other children had to suffer a torturous death just because the Israelites thought they knew better than God. So do we understand now? Although when we read Deuteronomy 7, at first glance it seems a bit harsh. But God knew exactly what he was doing. If the cancer of the Canaanites had been cut out, many lives would have been spared. To So we learn a very valuable lesson from this second half of our tour, is that sometimes Jehovah in his word, he asks us to do something and we think to ourselves, why on the earth is God asking me to do that? That doesn't seem to make any sense. Well, we can trust that if Jehovah asks us to do something, there is always a very good reason. He never, ever gives a law or a command just to be arbitrary. And we'll benefit if we're obedient. Now, what was the theme of our tour? Examples of loyal obedience. And what a contrast we've seen from the example of obedience set by Abraham and Sarah, who willingly sacrificed their comfortable and advanced lifestyle in the city of Ur, to the disobedience of the Israelites, whose actions cost the lives of thousands of further children over the next 1,000 years. Maybe we'll leave you with this thought. Did Abraham actually get a blessing for what he did? We said earlier, did he get to inherit the promised land? No. In fact, it wasn't until 300 or 400 years later that his descendants inherited the promised land. So did Abraham get a raw deal? Absolutely not. You see, Abraham, interestingly, Abraham doesn't know he's famous, does he?
No.
Because the Bible didn't start to get written until about 300 years after Abraham died. You see, when Abraham gets resurrected, we'll all know who he is. Hello, Abraham, nice to meet you. We talked about you at the British Museum once. Everyone will know who Abraham is, and he's held up as an example to Christians and other servants of God in ancient times to benefit. So does obedience bring blessings? Absolutely it does. Does disobedience bring problems? Absolutely it does. So let's see if we can keep those examples in mind, and hopefully it can help us to be a good example